Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the dark oak. And in today's bonus episode, we unearth the story of Ellen Sadler from the English village of Turville, who in 1870 became famous throughout the country for having fallen asleep and remaining asleep for 9 years before one day awakening and going on to live a relatively normal life.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month, through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of our proceeds from our Patreon and our sponsorships directly to a nonprofit related to the first episode of the month. To find out more, head over to our Instagram, The Dark Oak Podcast. You can go to our website, thedarkoak.com, or hang around to the end of this episode.
All right, Cynthia. Well, this is fun. This is a bonus episode. Now, these bonus episodes are a continuation of the celebration of our 100th episode. We decided as a thank you to all of our listeners that help us get to 100 episodes, every week in the month of April and May, we're going to bring 2 episodes on Wednesday and Friday. And this is one of those special episodes. So I'm really happy to be here and celebrate.
Yes, it's such a celebration, and this is our gift to you.
All right. Now, Cynthia, I don't want you to get turned off by the title of this episode because I know between the two of us, I'm definitely the one that gets drawn in to historical mysteries and crimes, but I really think you're going to find this one intriguing.
Well, I do enjoy fairy tales, and as you're describing it, I'm like, oh, is this a Sleeping Beauty type situation?
Okay, that's amazing that you just said that because it fits right into that mold of a fairy tale, folklore, a fable of some kind. I will tell you though, after researching this case and seeing how many news articles, medical journals, and just general scrutiny on the family, I'm not quite sure that it's either completely fictitious or a hoax. I think there is actually a lot of truth to it. I think something here mysteriously did happen. Now, was it a bizarre medical event? Is this a literal definition of a miracle? I don't know, but I want to tell you this mysterious story of Ellen Sadler, who is known as the Sleeping Girl of Turville. Now, our story starts in the village of Turville, a quintessential Buckinghamshire parish, which I just like to say because it sounds very British and very English, Buckinghamshire. Now, it was large but not densely populated. The parish church, St. Mary the Virgin, was appointed at the entrance to the village, and the 24 houses that made up the village were situated around it. One of these 24 houses, which still remains intact today, would become known as Sleepy Cottage, which is really saying something because this is back in 1870.
That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah. Now, Ellen Sadler was the 11th child of William Sadler, and Ellen's mother was William's second wife, Anne Parker. William's first wife, Anne Allum, bore him 3 children before she died in 1842. Soon after her death, William formed a relationship with Anne Parker, who was 16 years his junior. Together, they had 5 more children before they were married at Stoken Church on July 23rd, 1853. Now, after their wedding, William and Anne had 4 more children.
Wow.
Yeah, we just keep adding them up here. Now, these 4 additional children included Ellen, who was born on May 15th, 1859. Now, everything I'm about to tell you has been found in census data. So, incredibly, even though this was a long time ago, there were pretty intricate records that we have of this family throughout time.
We're up to 12 kids total, right?
11. We're at 11 surviving children.
Okay.
Now, according to this census data, William found work as a roadman, meaning he was responsible for the care and upkeep of the roads in and around the village, and Anne worked as a lace maker. But essentially, they were poor farmers who really relied on the village parish for assistance. I mean, you're not going to bring enough money to support 11 children.
A lot of children. I have seen lace making done, and they should be paid $1 billion cajillion for it because have you ever seen it?
I have. I saw, there was some like social media reel that came about, and it was wild.
It's like a spider web. I mean, it's amazing. It's an art, incredible.
The one that I saw, she had, I don't know, it felt like 30 different strings, like strands of the fabric, and then each one had like a little dole, is what I call it, that had like some kind of knob on the end, and you weave them, but then you put this set over here, and then you grab this other set. I would just be so confused about what belonged to what.
Oh, me too.
Like, how do you keep track of that many strings?
And the threads are so thin on top of that. They're like a spider web in a lot of ways. It's incredible. Such an art. So anyway, she should have been rich just based on her talent, if you ask me.
Unfortunately, I don't know that lace was as valued then as maybe it should have been. So unfortunately, it didn't bring in a lot of money. They're listed under the parish records as getting assistance, but truly all that meant was probably they got bread. I mean, it's not like they had a stipend or something, but they could go for meals and things like that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the 1800s of it all, William died in 1863, leaving Anne. Now, at this point, though, it only left Anne with her 3 youngest children to care for. That would have been Grace, who would have been 9, Ellen, who would have been 6, and little Eli, who would have only been 2.
Oh, wow. That's still a handful, even with the other 8 gone.
Right. Now, understandably, with no way to support this young family, Anne was anxious to remarry. She did so on July 15th, 1865, to Thomas Frewen. In her haste to choose a husband, though, Anne may have made a mistake. See, Thomas was around 39 years old, and up until that point, had exclusively been a bachelor, meaning he had exactly 0 experience caring for young children. Furthermore, he had a criminal record. By the age of 31, he had been jailed for 2 months for poaching, another 2 months for trespass. He had been fined £1 plus cost for assault, and then jailed an additional 1 month for non-payment of the fine.
Okay.
With all this said, it's possible that Grace, Ellen, and Eli spent many of their early years in, shall we say, a less than harmonious home environment.
That's sad. That's really sad.
Yeah. And also knowing they have very little resources as well. So it's just not the best circumstances. Now, Ellen was said to have been quiet, sedate, and thoughtful. She had a dreamy and listless manner and a deep melancholy, distant expression. She reportedly would sit for hours thinking and apparently oblivious to all that was going on around her. However, she regularly attended Sunday school and was keen to learn. It was said that the only thing which seemed to rouse her was her stepfather's, quote, intemperate habits, which included a fondness for alcohol.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. It was said that when Thomas Frewen came home intoxicated, Ellen would let him have it, which I hate that a young girl is ever in that position to have to do that. But it was the one thing that would kind of get her riled up. Because the family was impoverished at the tender age of 11, Ellen began work as a nursemaid to a family with 2 children. This did not last long, though, as Ellen was prone to periods of inattention and even falling asleep on occasion. Now, unsurprisingly, her employment was terminated because I imagine the family that she was caring for didn't like how she would just be sleeping on the job. Back home, she began to suffer from constant pain in her head. She was seen by a local doctor named Henry Heyman, who diagnosed Ellen with, quote, glandular swelling, which may be interpreted to mean she had an abscess on the back of her head. That's what more modern physicians have said. She also had symptoms consistent with a spinal disease. Now, Dr. Heyman felt that Ellen should be taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, this was not something her family could afford, so a local reverend and Dr. Heyman arranged for her admission to Reading Hospital. While at the hospital, her condition worsened, and after some 18 weeks, she was simply discharged as being incurable.
First of all, that's a really long time in the hospital. It's more than 4
Yes.
months.
Yes.
And I don't know. Wow. I can imagine how back in this time, this would have been a very perplexing situation. Even now, but how sad to be discharged and said, sorry, nothing we can do.
Right. Right. And this family is really at the mercy of charity, and just generosity. So what are they to say? Do more research, send her somewhere else? I mean, they really
Right.
are limited in what they can even do. Now, on the journey home from Reading to Turville, a distance of about 16 miles, Anne and Ellen rode home in what was described as a rickety cart. As soon as Ellen arrived home, she began to feel drowsy and then had several seizures. Again, according to Anne, Ellen was rocking herself back and forth with her little hands clasped together. Gradually, though, she began to lose control of her body, which began convulsing. Her legs and arms began thrashing wildly, and her eyes rolled back in her head. Dr. Heyman was sent for immediately, and upon arriving, he found that Ellen couldn't be roused. To the untrained eye, she even appeared to be deceased, and at first, Dr. Hayward feared as much. That is until he noticed her almost imperceptible breathing. Dr. Hayward wrote in his notes, quote, "The child fixen down, that is to say, she had sunk into a state of insensibility in which she now remains. She was on her left side with her hand under her head and her lower extremities drawn upwards," end quote. Because a fetal position is when you're totally crouched together. This one was described more as like genuinely a peaceful slumber. So like her hands under her head, like with her head on the pillow, and her legs just kind of drawn up a little bit.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily in a state of what one would perceive as pain, but just sleep, which is very strange. And the positioning is pretty important because Dr. Hayward reported that the entire 9 years he cared for her, she never changed positions.
That's interesting because even when a person is just sleeping, they change positions. Okay. So I'm sure you're going to get more into this. I don't know a lot about narcolepsy. Are we thinking maybe she had narcolepsy?
It's certainly a theory. It's
Okay.
absolutely a theory. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going through. Again, this is unsolved. We're really not sure what this was, but narcolepsy has been one of the suggestions. Now, most people that have narcolepsy don't just go to sleep for 9 years,
Right.
but maybe she had a rare form of it.
And again, that's where I don't really know much about narcolepsy other than what you see on TV. The fact that she didn't move makes me think, was she in a coma?
That's another
Or
theory.
what would have caused it?
Well, she was admitted to the hospital with some possible infection in her head, possibly some spinal infection. Could it be possible her body went into a coma? Again, we're going to talk more about it, but it's when you kind of hear the intro, you think, okay, well, this is silly. This is like Bell Witch territory, right? But I think there's really something to this.
I mean, it sounds to me like she had a very obscure medical condition, but I'm not a doctor, so I'm waiting for a doctor to say, okay, this is the condition that could present this way. And I'm assuming the fact it's an unsolved case, there's no clear answer.
Well, and I will say there are many that are thinking maybe it was just a hoax. Is it possible that none of this was even true? But then again, how do you explain for the amount of people, distinguished people, that saw her over the years and weren't able to decipher what was going on?
Right.
So I'll keep going, and you kind of keep all the ideas swirling. So again, no suggestion is wrong because we don't know. Now, of course, word started to spread of Ellen's sleep. There's this girl that just fell asleep and is not waking up. So many villagers began to travel to her home, and eventually word spread to other villages, and more people came to see the sleeping girl. And this is the time when fasting girls were a thing. Are you familiar with fasting girls?
No.
Okay. Again, this is the time when science is relatively new, especially when it comes to illnesses and things like that. And there were a lot of religious explanations used for things that people didn't understand. Around this time, I'm not really sure what started it, but there are several records of these fasting girls. And what they were is young women, usually beautiful young women, young girls, that would inexplicably stop eating and say the only food they needed was nourishment from God.
Okay.
Now, I think there were a lot of different reasons for this. Some have been found that the families themselves would invite visitors in who would leave them with a little change on the side for letting them see this girl who has kind of taken on like a saintly role. Others have said it was to bring encouragement to a village that it was having hardship. Like, look, if God has blessed us with this fasting girl, then good fortune must be coming our way. To date, they have found that all of these fasting girls were not fasting, as in behind closed doors or in some other manner, they were being snuck food. And the way they found this out was, unfortunately, some of these fasting girls getting taken from their home, put under a watch, if you will. And again, these girls wanting to keep up this ruse for whatever reason, because they felt like they were actually getting heavenly nourishment, or their family had encouraged them to keep it up, whatever it was. Many of these girls wound up literally starving to death.
Okay.
They just died of starvation. Many of them just simply starved to death when they were taken out of their homes. Meaning, obviously, if they had gone 3 years and supposedly never ate anything, but then were put in a clinical setting for monitoring and passed away a month later, clearly they were getting nourishment from their family or some other way. Does that make sense?
It does.
So this time, though, these fasting girls are very much believed to still be like saints, prophets, a gift from God, whatever you want to call it. So Ellen kind of fit into this category a little bit. And so people would travel to see her. Now, she was visited by medical professionals, religious men, again, these travelers that went to see the fasting girls, journalists, and honestly, just people that were curious. It was later found that several of Ellen's visitors had even tried to stick her with sharp objects to see if she would respond.
So, as you were describing this, I was thinking to myself, if this is a hoax, you would have to be an amazing actress. Because if I was pretending to be asleep and someone hurt me, hit me, said they were going to do something to me, tickled me, poked me with a pin, it doesn't matter how good of an actress you are, you're going to get a response. She had no reaction when this happened.
According to anyone that did it, now, of course, as soon as Anne, Ellen's mother, found out what was going on, she put a stop to it, because I don't care if you're protecting somebody because it's a hoax, or she really is in a coma or sleeping, hibernating state, whatever it is, you're not going to want your kid to be poked, right? So just because she put a stop to it doesn't mean it's a hoax. You just don't want your kid to be like stuck with
Of
stuff.
course.
But according to those that were able to get away with it in the beginning, there was no response. Now, I do go back to the fasting girls, though. They were literally willing to go to a hospital and still deny food, knowing they were going to die of starvation. So I don't know. Some of these ruses, I think people get pretty convicted into them. But I do think a girl refusing food is different than a girl getting stuck in her leg or her arm and your arm or leg not jerking back just on instinct.
Well, and I don't know if any of these visitors were left unattended with her, but if they were, there's all kinds of things they could be doing to try to get a response from her. I agree. I think some things are just instinct. If you hurt me, I'm going to pull back.
Right, right. Now, distinguished physicians did visit her home time after time, and they devoted care and study to her case, but none of them were able to come to definitive conclusions about what was happening to Ellen. Newspapers and journals also began to report on the strange sleeping girl. The Times, which was the most circulated paper in the United Kingdom, described Ellen's story as, quote, one of the most astounding, inexplicable psychological phenomena ever known, end quote.
I mean, I don't know that I disagree. It's pretty wild. If it's an act, man, that's a long game.
A
9
long game.
years, you're not going to be seen in public. You're not going to play with your friends. You're not going to go outside for 9 years. You have to be committed.
Absolutely. The Free Press of the time graphically explained their experience at the Frewen house. Quote, after climbing the rickety stairs and walking along to the room with the sloping roof, we saw in the smaller bed a girl laying on her left side with her hand on the pillow under her head, a position she was accustomed to being in before she was afflicted. Her soft, dark brown hair was confined in an old net and appeared to be very matted, a condition her mother explained by saying she did not want to comb it for fear of disturbing her. This threw her pale face into greater relief. Her eyes were sunken, and the appearance at a distance was that of death.
It just popped into my mind on the idea of fasting girls. She's asleep. She's not eating or drinking.
Okay, yes, that comes into this as well. For 9 years, those are some of the questions, and I'll explain what her family said. But I mean, again, I have questions. None of this makes sense. One journalist concluded, quote, I have no medical knowledge and am unqualified to give an opinion beyond what is justified by close observation of the ordinary kind. I went to Turville prepared to find an imposter, and I have returned puzzled. End quote. What none have argued is that Ellen's mother, Anne, showed great care and devotion to her daughter. And remember, at this point, Anne wouldn't have even known if Ellen was ever going to wake up. The Daily Telegraph journalist said, quote, Anne Frewen's manner is that of a perfectly honest woman who would be glad if her child could be restored to consciousness, end quote. The journalist also spoke to neighbors, none of whom indicated anything other than trust in Ellen's parents and Dr. Heyman. Now, there was never any mention of Anne's current husband, Thomas Frewen, in almost any of these articles or journals, so I've mostly concluded that he was not very involved with Ellen's care at all. It was basically exclusively her mother.
Well, that checks given the fact that he was a drinker. He didn't seem to be a very good caregiver even before this situation.
Right, right. Now, it should be noted that the family never asked for money, but people would begin to leave a small donation or a, quote, slight acknowledgement, as they were beginning to be called.
That was my thought. I thought, are they getting by with this? Are they making money with this? You don't have to ask for money if every single visitor is leaving a slight donation. Oh, here's just a little change. That adds up.
It does. Initially, some visitors even requested to purchase a lock of Ellen's hair.
That's gross.
It's weird. Now, again, though, remember in this religious time, it could have been something, a religious item, if you will. Now, Anne at first agreed to this, but she soon stopped when she realized Ellen would have no hair left. It was said that these donations could amount to £2 a week, equivalent to about £200 today.
And in American money, how much is that?
So, I mean, a little bit less than that. So, like $180
Okay. A week. So
a week.
not they're not rolling in it.
They're not rolling in it, but to extremely poor farmers who are literally getting their food from the church, that's
I guess
helpful.
that could buy groceries, I guess.
Right. Now, because money was involved, even though they weren't asking for it, but they were still receiving it, many of the villagers began to wonder if maybe this was a hoax. Suspicions grew when it was determined that Ellen was also suffering from starvation. Anne revealed that Ellen was being kept alive solely by a small amount of port wine and sugar, which she administered to Ellen through 2 small teapots 3 times a day. First, she said she could open Ellen's mouth slightly and take a small spoonful, but after about 15 months, her jaw became locked and they had to use these little teapots. And when I say little teapots, they literally are like a tea set like a little girl would play with, like a little tiny teapot. And they would put the mixture into the teapot and then they would pour it into the corner of Ellen's mouth. And she had a small opening back there because she had a missing tooth. But that's pretty much it. This port wine and sugar was all they gave to her. And on some occasions, they would give her a small amount of milk as well. But again, according to her family, that's all she had.
Which doesn't seem like enough to keep a person alive for 9 years. Because port wine and sugar, that's not nutrients.
Exactly. Again, these are very poor people in the 1800s. So I'm like, why didn't you give her more milk? Well, frankly, they probably didn't have it to give.
They may have given her all the milk.
They may have given her all the milk. Because according to what I saw from the parish, most of the time the parish just gave them bread. Like she can't eat bread.
Right.
So I think they did what they could. In 1875, when Ellen had been asleep for 4 years, someone, either out of concern for the girl's health, distrust for the family, or both, wrote to the highest ranks of government explaining the strange occurrences in Turville. Upon receiving the letter, the Home Secretary of the time demanded an investigation. After an inspection, a full report on Ellen's condition was released. Of Ellen, the report stated, quote, "The girl is now 16 years of age, and it is said that her lower limbs have recently assumed the appearance of those of a corpse, although her face has still a natural blush upon it." End quote. However, because the Frewens had never publicized Ellen's illness or asked for money, there was really no cause for the law to be involved. As in, there's no reason to remove her from the home. They don't have any reason to say, you're making this up or you're intentionally starving her.
Sure.
However, the report detailed a stern warning sent to the Frewens. The Home Secretary, quote, forwarded an authoritative document to the effect that failing to provide suitable nourishment and proper medical attendance, should the girl die, her parents will be held responsible. And this is a reference back to fasting girls. So all those parents whose girls wound up dying while being supervised by someone other than the parents were actually charged for that girl's death, as they should have been, because they had instructed their daughters not to eat, which is awful.
I mean, I see definitely why charges are pressed. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
So for this one, they're saying, I don't know if this fits into the fasting girl category, but you're just on notice. If she dies because of neglect or because you're trying to do something irresponsible or dishonest or illegal, whatever it is, you'll be held responsible for it.
That's a lot of pressure because we don't even know what's wrong with her. So what if she just wastes away because that's the nature of the disease? And now we're being held responsible for it.
I know, but at this point, she's been in this condition for 5 years.
She's not doing
well. She's not doing well. No. No. Go
It
ahead.
stands to reason that over time she could potentially deteriorate. Yes, I mean, she's doing amazingly well for being asleep for 5 years and not eating real food for 5 years. But I don't know how long you can go that way. I mean, her limbs are starting to atrophy. I think that would be a lot of pressure for me as a caregiver when we really don't know if she's ever going to wake up. She may eventually die. And wow, for me to be blamed if I'm doing all I can, that's a lot of pressure.
It's pretty grim. And I do think the warning was more not that if she passes away and we determine it was natural causes that you're going to be held responsible, but if we figure out, like if we find out you're forcing her not to eat or you're giving her something to make her sleep, then you're in trouble.
Sure, that makes sense.
While suspicion continued to linger, Ellen's condition remained the same for another 4 years. That wasn't until late May of 1880 when Anne passed away from edema of the heart, or in today's terms, heart failure, from which she had been suffering for many years. She was 55 years old. An inquest into her death was held by the county coroner on June 4th at the Bull and Butcher pub. It could get any more British than that.
I know.
A major part of the proceedings was to consider how Ellen would now be cared for. After a few formalities at the pub, the officials and the jury walked the few yards to Sleepy Cottage, where multiple witnesses testified about Ellen's condition. Thomas Frewen was the first to make a statement. He mostly spoke of his wife's death. He was then cross-examined by the coroner about Ellen. Now, his answers to these questions were somewhat evasive. At one point, he simply stated that Ellen was not his daughter, leaving many in the jury confused until Dr. Heyman pointed out that Thomas was Anne's second husband, because that wasn't made clear in the beginning. And so people are like, wait a minute, what are we even talking about here?
Right.
He did confirm that as far as he knew, Ellen had never been moved, even though he couldn't say for sure because he was at work all day. When he answered a question about Anne feeding Ellen, he said that he had seen her feed Ellen twice in the night, but since he was usually asleep, he couldn't say more than that.
In all those years,
In
he saw
all those years. That's right.
twice.
I will also say, clearly they lived in a very quaint cottage. So Ellen's bed was in the same room as Thomas and Anne. So, like, it seems very strange. Then again, if he was that disconnected to the family, maybe he really didn't, or he just didn't care.
Well, that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds to me he just doesn't care. He's not going to help his wife. He's not
Yep.
going to help his daughter, regardless of whether she's his stepdaughter. He came into the
Yep.
picture when she was, what, 6? Like, come
Yep.
on.
Yep, exactly. So to me, I don't know that this is an indication of anything except just a disconnected stepfather. Elizabeth Stacy, one of Anne's older daughters, also testified to Anne's care of Ellen. When Elizabeth was staying at the cottage, she said, quote, her sister did not have any food, only drink, port wine, tea, and milk, which were given to her every hour. She also confirmed that neither she or Anne had ever turned Ellen over onto her other side, and she had never heard Ellen speak.
Wouldn't she be covered in bed sores?
That's one of my questions. You're hitting all the high notes. This is stuff we're going to talk about in the end. Like, how did she not have bed sores? She didn't. Nothing has reported any bed sores. How is that possible?
Yeah, I don't know. Something's fishy. Even just with that. Just with that.
Isn't that weird?
Fishy.
I think it's weird. Dr. Heyman testified, confirming that Ellen was always lying in the same position. So Dr. Heyman again is doubling down and saying, I know she didn't have any bed sores, but she was never moved. Now, he believed that Ellen's spine was paralyzed and that she was unconscious. However, the local Reverend Studholm, spoke in disagreement. He thought that Ellen was conscious. He had made several unannounced visits, and she was always laying in the same position, even when he called suddenly. But his interpretation is that she could have gotten in that position somehow. However, he confirmed that he had seen her be fed in the manner that was described by the witnesses. And as the liquid passed down her throat, He also noticed that it was more like a funnel, like he didn't actually see her actively swallowing, but it just literally ran down the back of her throat.
Would that cause a choking sensation?
Yes, I would think, unless you truly are in a coma or unconscious.
But even I'm just thinking if I had, say, a tube into the back of my mouth, if someone put liquid in my mouth and I didn't actively swallow, I think I would choke. Would it just go down naturally? Just gravity and not choke? Even if I'm completely relaxed? I don't know. I don't know enough about the anatomy, how that works, but that just seems weird to me.
It's strange either way. If she's actively swallowing, then you would think, maybe she's not unconscious. But again, how is she able to make it this far and it never accidentally goes into her lungs or anything like that? Like how is this possible?
Right.
Lastly, a few villagers came forward saying that they had seen Ellen walking through the graveyard at night and looking through her bedroom window when she thought no one was looking. But no one was able to provide evidence or corroboration for these stories. The coroner concluded that since Thomas Frewen was not Ellen's father, as he clearly stated, he had no legal responsibility to care for her. It was therefore decided that Ellen would be looked after by her sister, Elizabeth Stacy, and Elizabeth's husband. It is also possible that Ellen was cared for by Grace. Remember that sister that was just a few years older than her? Even though Grace was only, again, 3 years older than Ellen, she had been married to Reuben Blackall in 1877 and had already given birth to 2 children. In June of 1880, shortly after the inquest, when Ellen reached the age of 21, Dr. Heyman wrote to the medical journal, The Lancet, summarizing Ellen's case. In the letter, he said that, quote, at an early stage of her illness, I wanted to apply galvanism, but this was strongly opposed by the parents, end quote. Okay, I did a lot of research on galvanism, and I can't say I fully understand it, but I'm not a scientist, so I will try to explain it as easily as I can. But galvanism was an 18th, 19th century scientific theory that said that the human body could be reanimated by electric shocks. And these electric shocks were produced by chemical reactions. This practice was often used to treat mental illnesses and to try to revive people after drowning or lightning strikes.
Frankenstein.
Okay, that's exactly what I was going to say. There are many that think Mary Shelley, the author of the book Frankenstein, had galvanism in mind when she wrote the novel. For anybody who doesn't know about Frankenstein, I can't imagine you wouldn't, but basically a man is stitched together by all different body parts and then brought back to life. More modern depictions show him being brought to life through just electricity flowing through him. But galvanism, which is the reanimation, again, used by these chemical reactions, probably more of what she had in mind when she actually wrote it. Of course, more modern versions have like the big switch coming down. He's alive. But galvanism, wherein the muscles are reanimated, was probably more what Shelley was thinking. So it's just kind of an interesting tidbit about history. However, as it pertains to Ellen, I can see why her parents were hesitant to let Dr. Heyman try this cure? Question mark.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be signing up for that.
No, and I guess I shouldn't even say cure, treatment. I don't know what you would call it, but I think regardless of what Ellen was suffering from, I don't think galvanism was the direction we should have headed. So I'm glad that they were able to steer Dr. Heyman away from that.
And to clarify, there have never been any cases where galvanism has actually been successful, correct?
No, there has not. I will say, though, these electric shocks, they do actually work, though. I mean, they stimulate muscles to move. So you can go and look at old scientific theories whereby they attach them. The one that I saw was they attach these electric shock to like frogs' legs. So it would be like a deceased frog. But by using these electric currents, they can get the legs to move, to contract and relax. So it's like they're moving. It's like they're animated and alive, but they're not.
Well, similar to a heart defibrillator.
It's similar. It's very close to what we do today, but today we do it through actual electricity.
Okay.
This other one, and I'm not sure the chemical reaction that caused these currents, but it was basically the precursor to what we know
Gotcha.
today to shock muscles into working again. So it's similar, but different. 5 months after Ellen left her family's home and moved in with her sister, a strange thing happened. She began to show signs of waking. On New Year's Eve, 1880, more than 9 years after falling asleep, the Free Press broke the news that at last the sleeping girl of Turville was awake. She was conscious and speaking. Now, by this time, Ellen was 21 years old, but she spoke and acted like a child. She had absolutely no memory of those 9 years.
That's wild. But Stephanie, I will tell you the timing of it. Oh, I find that suspicious.
Well, there is a possible explanation for that in one of the medical theories as well. Luckily for us, reliable Dr. Heyman again wrote to the medical journal, The Lancet, about the nature of Ellen's situation. And again, I find the fact that all these are written in these medical journals do make me think that this wasn't purely some kind of spiritual hoax. On January 16th, 1881, he reported, quote, "It may be interesting to know that a change has taken place in the girl. I was called to see her about 3 weeks ago. That would have been around Christmas time, 1880. And on the occasion of my visit, I took her hand in mine and said to her, 'Ellen, if you know me and all around me and everything that I said, squeeze my hand.' This she did firmly. I repeated the same words, and she again squeezed my hand. Today, which would have been about January 13th, I have visited her again and have had a conversation with her. She has opened her eyes and answers every question I put to her. She takes plentiful nourishment many times a day, and she hopes soon to be able to sit up. Her general health in every respect is quite regular." End quote.
That's wild.
Yes! After adjusting back into the real world, Ellen went to stay with her aunt, Mrs. Blackwell, and earned her living working with bees. A few years later, she married a farmer from nearby Folly named Mark Blackall and moved out of the district. Over the next 12 years, the couple had 5 surviving children, 4 daughters, Anne, Elizabeth, Gladys, Gertrude, and 1 son named Sidney. Ellen died in 1946. She was 86 years old.
Wow.
Her body was then taken to Caversham for burial in the Henley Road Cemetery on October 30th, 1946. She never gave any interviews or spoke of her strange extended slumber.
Does she have any more episodes? I'm assuming
I would
no.
say, nope. Completely normal. And we have pictures of her, family pictures of her,
That's
like at
cool.
her granddaughter's wedding. So I'm going to post that on social media, but we have pictures of her. Like, I mean, I think that's just incredible. Okay, but this is totally weird. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about how she did not starve.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sugar and port wine isn't going to do, even milk. It seems unlikely you're going to survive for 9 years. And
I mean, they
sugar,
did say tea, maybe bone broth was in there. How did she not starve? Well, let's go back. Do you think her parents, or specifically Anne, do you think that they're behind it, or do you think this was a medical issue? I think you have to kind of start there.
I am undetermined because
Okay.
there's a lot that points to this is real. There's still enough unanswered questions for me that I would like to hear more about why she woke up only 5 months after leaving her mother's care. I would like to know more about
Mhm.
how her body physically survived without getting very much nutrients.
Mhm. And then the
Um,
bed sores. The bed sores,
the
girl.
bed sores. I need those questions answered before I can rule out Anne being involved with this.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I know. And remember, the medical profession was still in its infancy at this period. So even basic illnesses were not understood very well. But let's talk about narcolepsy. That's one of the first things that came up in your mind, right?
Right.
So sleeping disorders like narcolepsy were basically unheard of in those days. Nobody even knew what they were. In fact, narcolepsy was not diagnosed until the second half of the 20th century. So narcolepsy is actually a relatively new diagnosis. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, narcolepsy is a chronic neurological disorder that affects the brain's ability to control sleep and wake cycles. Now, according to the NHS website, which specializes in narcolepsy, narcolepsy can prevent a person from choosing when to wake or sleep. And in an attempt to avoid attacks, some people may become emotionally withdrawn and socially isolated. Now, could it have been that Ellen suffered from an extreme form of narcolepsy, which was compounded by severe emotional stress arising in her family after her mother remarried Thomas Frewen? Remember, she was always described as being drowsy and kind of like in her own little world. And then when she was 11 and she was forced to have more social interaction, she was required to bring in money for the family, probably at the encouragement of her father or stepfather, I would imagine. Did her little brain just say, we can't do it anymore, and basically switch off? What would be interesting about this theory is at first glance, you would think the fact that she's away from Anne helped her to awaken. But what if it's the fact that she was away from Thomas that allowed her to awaken?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But would that be a subconscious thing, do you think? Or
I
would
don't
that point
know.
to the hoax?
I think it could be either, truly, because again, if this narcolepsy, if it really is your brain saying we need to protect ourselves from whatever this stress stimulus is, could there have just been this subconscious awareness that Thomas was still there? Maybe she already had this propensity in her. She already had this narcoleptic tendency, and then the stress triggered it. But once she was removed from that environment, her body was able to recover.
I don't think that's impossible. I could go down that road. It still doesn't describe the bed sores.
Right.
And then I don't know enough about narcolepsy to know, do you roll around? I mean, I know some people are more like still sleepers than others, but you would think in 9 years there'd be some movement.
You can't determine when you fall asleep and wake up. However, it doesn't turn into like a coma,
Right.
which for me, the narcolepsy thing, is it possible? Sure. But being diagnosed with the abscess, being diagnosed with some kind of spinal disease, I think maybe she just had swelling in her brain that put her into a coma. And through assistance of her mother, she was able to be kept alive enough that her brain was able to come out of it. But again, the bed sores and then the lack of proper nourishment, which again makes me think, like I said in the beginning, maybe this was just a flat out miracle of some sort. I don't know. Somehow her body was both challenged with whatever was going on with her brain, but then also had this strange ability to heal itself.
I believe in miracles.
Yeah.
So why not? It's strange.
Yeah.
It's unusual, but I can't say it's impossible. In the natural
Yeah.
world, it seems impossible, but we have seen weird
Well,
things
we
happen.
we do know people go into comas. They go into comas after infections and illness. And a lot of times, if someone has suffered a major trauma, doctors will elect to put them in a coma so that their body has time to heal.
Right? Okay.
Could this have been her own body putting herself into a coma? And then the waking up was more of a coincidence. And if
I
that's the
did.
case, poor Anne, who never actually got to see her daughter, got to see literally, Anne, you kept her alive for 9 years that she was able to go on and live a normal life, which is
Well,
incredible as well.
And I don't know how I feel about that, because if it's true, if this was real and Anne kept her alive and then Anne didn't get to see her daughter wake, that's tragic. If Anne was behind this for financial gain, for any reason, really, if Anne was behind this, I can see why waiting until she's passed on and then giving enough time that maybe it's not obvious that, hey, my mother forced me to spend 9 years of my life like this. I can also see that.
I also do wonder, I haven't seen anything about this because after Anne died and Ellen went to live with her sister, we don't have any insight as to how she was treated at her sister's home. But I wonder if her sister was able to give her more nourishment, which allowed her to come out of the coma.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Because that would have given her 5 months of possibly having more sustenance. Or maybe the way she was being cared for, maybe it wasn't even the food. Maybe there was something else that they were doing. They were sitting her up in a chair. They were repositioning her. I don't know, something that the care was different enough that it allowed her brain to recover.
I think that's absolutely a possibility. Just more, almost more modern care, because we see even now, the way our parents did things, the way they
Yeah.
cared for us when we were infants versus the way we care for our own infants. We've learned a lot, we've changed a lot. And so, this is a younger person, maybe back in the 1800s, they'd made great strides in the medical advancements, and she's doing something different.
And it may even been they were better off financially because I know her husband was pretty upstanding, which sounds like a lot more than, Ellen's stepfather. And so maybe there was just additional money to buy additional calories and nutrients. You know what I'm
And
saying? Not that Anne was doing anything wrong, but yeah, I don't know. Just the difference in households, the difference in the way she was treated, maybe just the change in that was enough to bring her out of the coma.
I could go with that. I could go along with that.
But of course, this is always covered by the haze of, was this all just some big hoax?
If this was a hoax, I don't know. That's commitment. It's
Right?
commitment. I can even see the fasting girls before this, because the fasting girls, maybe they truly believed that they were doing something for God and their families and their communities. So for them to just not eat and starve to death, like, they believe that they're doing the right thing. But this, if you are just outright faking, that's commitment.
Yeah. There's a fantastic movie. I cannot remember the name of it right now. I saw it on Netflix, and it's kind of one of those psychological thrillers, like you're really not sure who the bad guy is kind of situation. But it involves a fasting girl in Scotland, I believe. And the town has kind of gotten wise. They said, I don't know, I think something's going on here. And so they hire this nurse to come and live in the house with them and basically watch her 24 hours a day and make sure she never gets any food. And the nurse argues, how can I do it still in her home? So many people have access to her. But the family was like, absolutely not. We've been blessed by God. You're not going to disrupt our family. And this girl keeps living, like she keeps doing well. And the nurse can't figure out what's going on. And this is probably a bit of a spoiler alert, but in the end, what they find out after this nurse takes the girl out of the house, and of course she gets very sick, and then everybody blames the nurse. Like, you've basically killed her gift. Like,
Mm.
you've made the gift leave her because she starts actually starving. And then they put her back in her house and she starts doing better again. And what they figured out is that her mother would come and give her a kiss several times a day. And she was actually spitting food in her mouth when she
Wow.
would give her a kiss. And that was enough to keep her alive and give the impression that she wasn't eating. Now, this movie is fictitious, but it gives you an idea of this religious fervor that was going on at the time, that everybody wanted to believe she
Sure.
was a fasting girl and getting nourishment from heaven. And people were angry It was almost like this, like the religious community versus the scientific community, because the scientific community is saying it's not possible. And the religious community is saying that's from the devil, trying to disprove that this girl who is our prophet, basically, is lying. So it's a really interesting phenomenon, something clearly that couldn't happen in today's age, knowing what we know now. But it's interesting that wind up taking place.
Wow. Well, I'm baffled. What do you think? You think it's for real?
I do on this one. I don't really know what it was. I think it was because she had become so ill. She literally stayed at the hospital for 4 months.
Right.
Again, as an 11-year-old girl, I mean, could you have faked a headache? Yeah. You know what I mean? Could you have faked some of that stuff? Sure. Are you going to fake a seizure? You could. So none of it is for sure. So I can't say 100%, but I do believe she was afflicted by something. I do. I don't know what it was, but I do believe it. And I don't know if it was a change of care or literally just some miracle and she woke up.
I think I lean that way. I think I mean that it's real, but there are some questions.
What's wild to me is the swing either direction in how you view Anne. So she is either this saint of a woman who devoted a decade to caring for her ill daughter, feeding her from a tiny little teapot every hour, like all the cleaning and everything. So kept her alive for a decade with no medical training, with, just basically her mother's instinct. Or she's the woman that forced her daughter into being a captive in her own bed for a decade.
She's either a saint or a monster.
That's right. That's right. Depending on which way you lean, you can view her one way or the other.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good one, Steph.
Yeah, I hope we didn't lose anybody with the title, because I do feel you're like, okay, sure. But I think there's something to it. I don't think you can just automatically dismiss it on the surface.
No, I think there's some really compelling arguments for this being real. I mean, it's been documented through
Absolutely,
medical
it's been
professionals.
documented. That's right.
And at no point, well, other than the people saying they've seen her walking through the graveyard and looking in their windows, which of course you're going to say that. I mean, but other than that, nobody has come forward saying, hey, we saw her.
That's right. I love that, like, she was walking in the graveyard, like, specifically. I'm like, it would have been more believable if you're like, I saw her in the alley behind her house. The graveyard, really?
Exactly, which is why I immediately ruled that out. I was like, well, of course she was walking in the graveyard. Where else would she be walking in this story?
Of course she was in the graveyard. Exactly. So, anyway, Sleeping Girl of Turville.
Well, thank you, Steph, not only for a great case, but again, that's a bonus episode. So
a bonus
amazing.
Episode.
Thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers. You guys are awesome.
Thanks, you guys. Oh, and we will see you in our next episode, where we continue to celebrate 100 episodes. Whoop, whoop.
Woo!
All right. Bye-bye, Shiver Seekers.
Bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.